and Galileo went back to Florence. He finished his work, and he convinced, at that time there was a plague in Italy, and the travel between Rome and Florence was pretty iffy, and he convinced the prelates in Rome that he should have the censoring or the review of his dialogues done in Florence rather than in Rome. Well, in Florence, Galileo pretty well had his own way. So it was published, and as soon as it was published, they hauled him to Rome for the Inquisition. Now, he was fortunate that he met the Inquisition in Rome rather than in Spain. They were a little more serious about their fires in Spain than they were in Italy. But Galileo was put under house arrest. He was confined, but not as in prison. Instead, he was refused a parole and medical treatment, but he was in his 70s, which was an old man for those days, and had reasonably good health. And his daughter was a nun who resided in a monastery just around the corner from his house. And we presume that she had medical training, and she cared for him until her death in, I think, 1638. Perhaps the greatest sanction that they put on Galileo was that they did not allow him to write. By writing, I guess they meant he couldn't publish anything, because he managed to complete his dialogue on the two new sciences, which treated his physics problems, the dynamics of motion, and his studies of the characteristics of gases. They smuggled the volume out to Europe, where it was published, and his theories of motion were embraced wholeheartedly by the entire community of science. And we take, about this time, Tom Settle walked us over to our secretary, and this is the bust, the niche and the bust of Galileo in the front of his house. Now, this house is now part of the property of the observatory, and while we were there, it was being renovated for use as a guest house for visitors to the observatory. And as you look at it, you'll see he wasn't really too badly off. Now, these are bars on the outside walls, but I've been assured that those were not there in 1642 when Galileo died. This is on the street, and apparently they have difficulties with intruders in Italy as well as we do in Lisbon. Now, this is inside the entry as you come in. It's a vaulted ceiling, very well done. Corner ceramic stoves. And in the right picture is one of the pieces of furniture that was with Galileo in his house while he was under house arrest. It's a large yard, an atrium inside. This gate goes from the atrium out into the courtyard. It's a rather large house for Italy, and of course we did have the clutter of the work going on at the time we were there. I had to prove that I did make it. This is the fireplace. It's large, but apparently not for large fires. There's a small fire in the pit in the middle, and the chimney with the damper has a basement, stone, indications of modernity in the air conditioning lines coming into the building. The roof trusses are original. The superstructure is not. It has been replaced. And that's looking across from the first floor into the atrium. I don't know if those cobbles, those clay tiles have been there since 1600 or not, but they look like. Looking out his bedroom window, we looked across the Tuscan hills. Out the other window, we see the observatory just across the ravine. So he was not held in uncomfortable circumstances, except that he was not allowed to write. He was not allowed any freedom outside his villa. And they claimed they didn't allow him medical treatment, but since he lived to be about 78, he was obviously in pretty good health. And in the 1600s, a 78-year-old man was a sage at that time. So I can understand Galileo. He was an iconoclast, there was no doubt about that. He laid the foundations for modern science, in particular physics. He was the first experimental physicist that we had. So he changed completely the field of astronomy and physics, and that extended to virtually every other area of endeavor as the more liberal thoughts began to be published and began to be accepted. Now the church took Galileo's dialogues off the prescribed list sometime in the 1800s. So it didn't take them very long to acknowledge that yeah, I guess that the earth does go around the sun probably goes around something else. But it has been said that as Galileo left the Inquisition, as he was sentenced, and he had said, well, he supposed he had been overly aggressive in presenting his ideas. And then as he walked away, some have said that he said, but the world turns just the same. So I don't think he was too repentant. He did what he had to do to keep the fire away from himself. He gave great impetus to science and free thought in the world. He was bored as a child, and I can understand that. That's the reason I left school in the 11th grade in early 1941, joined the Navy, and traveled the world, much as Galileo did. And what a wonderful experience that 21 years was. We owe a lot to Galileo. And this year, we're trying to give some of that back to him. Thank you.
You may have time for a question or two.
I told you.
Bob, you never answered it. You said he designed designed the pendulum clock, but didn't build it. So what did he use to time his experiments?
On the incline.
On the inclined plane,
How
he
did you
used a
time it?
water clock for a timing experiment.
Not in the winter, I'll bet.
Huh? Well, I don't know. I don't know. They tell me that the Arno doesn't freeze over very often. So perhaps it was all right. But a water clock, he had a jet that he would start running when the ball started, and when he got the ding, when it went across the first place, he'd shut the pinch cock off and then put that amount of water on his balance and determine what mass of water had flowed in that first time interval. And then he let it flow the second, did the same thing, measured the distance and the time so that the amount of water that flowed into his container was proportional to the time. And he wasn't concerned with whether he was establishing a time interval of 1 second. What he was interested in was establishing a repeatable time interval. And for years there were arguments about this until a young graduate student at Princeton did some experiments on this in the 60s and showed that it was possible with this device that he built. And the drawings of his inclined plane are available with the type of wood he used, the dimensions of the track, so that this young man built the inclined plane and built a water clock and was able to show that with sufficiently good statistics, put it that way, he got results that were reasonable, giving the distance traveled down the plane being proportional to the time it took for it to travel down the plane.
It was my intention tonight to have a replica Galileo telescope here. Disaster struck, and we don't quite have the instrument available. Although we do have refractors that are kind of old. And we're going to take these out into the courtyard to give you a little bit of a flavor for what Galileo might have seen. As Dr. Gruebel has mentioned, it was kind of an interesting twist of the way science was done at the time, that even the faculty at his university refused to look through his instrument. And their reasoning was, everything that's knowable was told us by Aristotle. If Galileo is seeing things that Aristotle didn't know about, he must be looking at defects in the glass. Why should we